want to talk about the vision that I had while listening to Jordan Peterson. This is quite a while ago now, but I remember that I was working in an unoccupied home, installing some trim on the cabinets. Before I had gotten there, on the drive up, I was actually listening to a different podcast about a Christian author who had written a book. The deceptive nature of temptation. He really was focusing on talking about the Garden of Eden and what went wrong there in some ways. And when I finished listening to that, I had been slowly working my way through Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning lectures. And at one point, while I was listening, he talked about how there was an evolutionary arms race between the size of a baby's head and the width of a woman's hips. And that this was a really remarkable statement that was put in the Bible about how God was increasing the woman's pain in childbearing. And as he was saying this, the whole thing really clicked together in my mind about what I had listened to previously and thinking about what was going on there. And that this was actually a beautiful way that God had repaired something that had gone wrong. And my belief was that when a baby is born, it does not have a correct conception of its place in the universe. And it believes that it is some sort of God. It believes that it is the master of its own little universe, and that parents and everything are here for the pleasure of that baby. And of course, this is something that the baby comes to a rude awakening about, because life is difficult and the baby's actually extremely powerless. But Jordan Peterson says that the gestation for humans, biologically and physically, is really about 13 months shorter than it should be. If you think about a toddler, it's 13 months, probably walking and starting to talk. That's the age at which a human baby should be born. You know, like a young horse or a cow, they come out of the womb and then within a few hours they're standing on their own and walking and running. And that would be equivalent really to about that 12 or 13 month age toddler. As he was talking about this, it just made me think of how God worked in such a miraculous way to bring about this change. And he documented it in this way. Because the baby has this false notion of its own importance. And this is what is the result of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the tree. And that's passed down to all of us. And we all need to learn our own unimportance. And this is why all children move from selfishness towards maturity over time, if they're raised well. But those first months are very crucial. As Dr. Peterson also said, that a child that doesn't learn how to play properly within the ages of 2 and 4 can be damaged permanently in their social interactions. And if a child who believes that it's actually some kind of a god was developing and growing inside the womb for an additional 12 or 13 months, it would be hard to disabuse that child of such a notion when it's in a comfortable environment in which it has no struggles, and all of its needs are being met, and it is being fed and cared for. It has no interaction with beings more powerful or greater than itself. But of course, when a baby's born, it's in for a rude awakening, as life is difficult, and the baby has very little power to do anything on its own. It can't feed itself, it can't move on its own, it can't clean itself when it makes a mess. Without even the basic propositional understanding of this, all of us have learned before we were conscious or we had a conscious memory of it, that we are not the masters of the universe. The realization that he saw this in that passage, and no one else had ever mentioned anything like that, and it was always seen only as a way that the woman was being punished for her sin. But it's not a punishment at all, because it's a blessing. Because without that, we would have no hope. We would all be born halfway to becoming psychopaths, if not all the way. And God, in his wisdom, provided a means by which these little sinful babies could learn their proper place. And as I had this realization of what the implications of this connection were, I actually had to go into a small room in this house. It was empty, but just because I didn't want anybody to come in, and I just began to get on my knees, and I was sobbing, and I was praying, thanking God for the wisdom that he had given to Jordan, and that he would not withhold the intimate, personal knowledge of his presence from this man for much longer. And of course, God, in all of his wisdom, knows exactly when and how it is most important to draw people to himself. But it is still my prayer that at some point Jordan will understand the personal knowledge of who Christ is and what his true relationship is with his Creator. So that was the first vision that I had. The second time was actually when I was listening to Paul Vanderklay, and he was just playing a short clip of Jordan interviewing Dave Rubin about his plan for surrogate parenting and all of these ways that he was moving out of the natural order of God's plan. And as I was listening to this, I had a vision of God as the Father in some sense. And that what he does not express clearly is that he created everything at such a high cost to himself. And this was the way in which he created the world, and the way in which he created people. And he did this in such a way because it was within his wisdom to do it that way. But what he gave to us as people was an ability to create new life in a far less painful way. And that he just desired for as many people to become as could be. And it's, in one sense, perhaps a way that he could surprise himself, or perhaps that's not the right word, but I just saw this heart of a father and a grandfather in a way, and just that no one will ever understand the value in a relationship like a parent to a child. And as I was thinking about this, I thought about my own children and how I really did not know exactly what the relationship between a parent and a child was. It was impossible to know until it was happening. But as I was thinking about that and I saw this vision of the heart of God, I just realized how shallow all of the lies that are spoken about why a child is not a thing of value, and how people are told that a career is a more central value to their life, or that friendships are adequate in relation to value in a person's life, or that the principal reason to commit to a relationship with somebody was for your own pleasure, and that the purpose of sex is for pleasure, and putting of your own needs above the needs of a child, and not even to think of the child as having needs, because that child does not exist. But the counterintuitive part of this is that you will never ever know what you are missing until you get a taste of what that is. And as I had become a parent, and in this moment realizing that, I'm an introverted person, and it's not super easy for me to make deep friendships, but each child that I have with my wife will be somebody that I will know far deeper and far more intimately than anyone else, except for my wife, but then also in a totally different way, because this is the only person that I have knowledge of that they don't have of themselves. I have a different relationship in that I am exterior to them. I see them from the moment they're born. My wife's experience is even greater in some sense, because she knows these. She knew our daughters before they were born, and then when our daughters were born, it wasn't just an introduction to a person they'd never met before, but it was the experience of finally seeing someone face to face that you had shared a bond of affection with. And it's a different sort of consummation, whereas in a marriage or something, there's a longing during a period of betrothal, and then the moment comes when you stand face to face with your other half. But in becoming a parent, it's a similar experience in that way, but it's not an equal footing you're standing on. This person's totally at the mercy of your willingness to take care of them and provide for them. I had already experienced the sort of supernatural love that you can have for a child. It's not because of any emotional gift that they're giving to me, but because they're part of God's creation that is utterly helpless without you. And so the idea of changing a dirty diaper or anything like that, there's no hesitancy at all, because that child is suffering and they can't do anything about it. So who cares what it costs you? There is nobody else that they're looking at for help. You need to be the person for them, and so that's what you do as a parent. And it's just an act of sacrifice, but it's not difficult sacrifice. There is such great joy in that. And so as I was listening to this sad interview about a man who was not willing to do anything self-sacrificial in order to have a child, but instead, for his selfish reasons, was willing to separate a child from its biological mother, its mother of nurture, who actually gives birth to the mother, to rob that child of all the normal experiences that go into being in a family, and replace it with these other things. I just became heartbroken, and I realized that any reasons why not to have a child pale in comparison to the possibility of what could be. And of course, I understand this is not necessarily the case for everyone. And of course, there are limits Not everybody should have a giant family and all those things. But what it did make me realize is that I could not, in good conscience, say it's okay for me to be in charge of deciding if we're going to have another child or not. And I just had to put it in God's hands. And God's in control of that situation, because there's lots of times when people try to have a baby and they don't. And then there's lots of times when they're trying not to have a baby and they will. And there's no guaranteed way to get the result that you want. So it's always in God's hands. But we can certainly decide to go against what he may be leading us towards, or try to trust him. And so later that day, I ended up having a conversation with my wife, and we discussed what our thoughts were about having children for the future and when it would be a good time to think about that again. And I just said that I couldn't in good conscience make that choice. I couldn't choose to purposefully try to avoid that. And I kind of relate to her some of what I was thinking about when I had this sort of vision. And then it was not, but I think the next day when my wife realized that she was actually already pregnant. God had already set things in motion and then prepared our hearts in a way. In a way, it was almost, to me, it was almost as much of a divine revelation as if an angel had come and said the words, because I realized that there's a potential person that I will have a relationship with, that I'll get to know and treasure more than anyone else. How selfish would I have to be to say, no, I don't want a relationship with that person, because it would be too inconvenient. It would cost too much money. It would take too much of my time. It would make my life too difficult. It would cause stress. And all of those arguments just paled in comparison to what is coming in return. And there is a lot of stressful questions about that. But providentially, at the same moment, we realized that within the last few weeks or months, my wife and I had both received promotions at work. And we'll have increasing bills, but we have an increasing means to take care of those bills as well. And I just think that this is, perhaps one of the greatest things that we need to fight for, is just to get people to consider. And it's difficult because until you're a parent, you can't know. But parents need to speak about the joy of being a parent. This needs to be something that is heard and understood. I think we know it on an intuitive level, but there's so many voices telling us otherwise that it's easy to forget and crowd it out. And so I just want to begin to look at that as a certain lens to look through the world. And anything that's being proposed about what your values are and what's important in life, does it take away from the potential for you to have an incredible relationship with a person that's deeper and more intimate than you'll ever have with a friend, or someone you mentor, or someone you work with, or someone who's passionate about the same things? It's difficult being a parent. It's not by any means easy, but it is worth it. It's incredibly worth it. And I can't think of anything that's more worthwhile. When we think of success and we think of what that means, gold and silver fade away, but the relationships that we have with others, they're going to last forever. And the potential relationship you have with a child is unlike any other. Those are my thoughts. Just wanted to share that experience. And hopefully it's encouraging to someone and makes you think about some thought-provoking stuff. Thank you.